Back in 2013, the Philippines completely overhauled its education system, adding more years of school for every single kid. It was a massive, monumental change. But here's the kicker. Was it even legal? This wasn't just a reform that happened in classrooms, it was immediately thrown into a legal battle, with its entire future hanging in the balance at the nation's highest court.
You know, when the Supreme Court handed down its decision on this huge case, they didn't start with a bunch of legal gobbledygook. Nope, they opened with poetry from Jose Rizal himself. It talks about a throne built on knowledge, where a new generation rises, and where even ignorance finds guidance. A pretty powerful way to start a ruling that's all about the future of education, right?
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the law itself, going on trial. Then, we'll dig into that big jump from 10 to 13 years of school. We'll uncover the surprisingly long history behind this idea, get into the nitty-gritty of the constitutional challenges, and finally, we'll get to the Supreme Court's ultimate decision.
All right, let's get right into the thick of it. This is the moment when the K-12 law, officially Republic Act 10533, found itself under a massive legal microscope, with the Supreme Court deciding its fate.
It all boiled down to this one massive question. Was this sweeping reform, a change that would affect literally millions of students, teachers, and their families? Was it even constitutional? Did the government actually have the right to make such a drastic change?
And let me tell you, the opposition was not small. This wasn't just one group with a bone to pick. We're talking petitions from teachers and university staff who were terrified of losing their jobs, from members of Congress, from students and parents, and even just regular taxpayers who all believed this new law was just plain unconstitutional. Okay, so to really get what this whole legal fight was about, you've got to understand just how huge this change was. The K-12 law wasn't just a minor tweak. It was about adding 3 entire years to the country's basic education system.
So check out the difference. The old system was pretty straightforward. 6 years of elementary, 4 years of high school. That's it, 10 years. But the new K-12 system, whole different ballgame. It made kindergarten mandatory, then it broke up high school into a 4-year junior high and 2 brand new specialized years of senior high. A full 13-year journey from start to finish.
So this new path wasn't just about tacking on more years for the sake of it. It created a much more defined structure, a whole new ladder for students to climb. You start with mandatory kindergarten, move on up through elementary, then junior high, and you cap it all off with those 2 years of specialized senior high. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. This whole add more years to school thing just popped up out of the blue, right? Well, not even close. Turns out, this was an idea that people had been debating and pushing for almost 100 years.
I mean, just look at this history. We're going way back to 1925, when a survey was already saying the system needed a boost. Then, over and over through the decades, you see these major reports from UNESCO, from presidential commissions, all basically saying the same thing. The Philippines needs to add more years to its education system to keep up with the rest of the world.
And there was a really powerful reason for this decades-long push. It's because on the world stage, the Philippines was, well, it was an outlier. Before the K-12 law was passed, the Philippines was one of only 3 countries left in the entire world that still had a 10-year basic education system. The only others? Angola and Djibouti. That's it.
All right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. What were the actual legal arguments? The people who challenged the law weren't just saying they didn't like it. They were arguing that it directly violated the Philippine Constitution on some really fundamental points.
Argument number 1 was all about the right to a free education. See, the Constitution is very clear. Public high school has to be free. But the critics pointed out a problem. A lot of public schools weren't ready for senior high. So the government created a voucher system to help kids go to private schools instead. The petitioners said, wait a minute, that's not the same thing as providing free public education. You're forcing families to go private.
Then you've got the second big issue, the rights of teachers and university staff. This was a massive deal. Think about it. If you add 2 years to high school, that means for 2 straight years, there would be almost no freshmen entering college. University professors and staff were terrified, arguing that this would cause huge job losses and violate their constitutional right to security of tenure, which is basically the right to not get fired without a very good reason.
And the third major argument was all about culture and language. This one had a couple of different parts. First, some people challenged the new policy of using local, mother tongue languages in the early grades.
Second, and this was a big one, people were outraged that to make room for the new curriculum, core subjects like Filipino and Philippine literature were being cut from the required general education courses in college.
Okay, so you have all these powerful arguments hitting the table. Free education, job security for teachers, the very language of instruction, and the place of Filipino culture in schools. With all that at stake, what did the Supreme Court have to say? It's time for the final word.
Now, before we get to the verdict, there's a really important legal idea we need to wrap our heads around. It's called state police power. And no, it has nothing to do with actual police officers. It's the fundamental power a government has to create laws and regulations for the good of the public, even if those laws interfere a little with individual rights or property. It's all about promoting the general welfare. And the court basically used that very power to make its decision. This quote from the ruling says it all. They're saying that because the government has a high responsibility for educating its citizens, it absolutely has the power to control things like how long basic education should be. They saw it as a reasonable and legitimate use of their power for the common good.
And there you have it. The gavel came down. The Supreme Court ruled point by point that the K-12 law was constitutional. They said Congress acted within its authority, that the voucher system was a perfectly fine way to give students access, that using mother tongue languages was legal, and that even though the fears about job losses were real, the law itself didn't technically violate anyone's constitutional rights. The law was here to stay.
So the legal fight? That's over. Case closed. The law is the law. But that leaves us with the real question, doesn't it? The Supreme Court settled the issue of whether the law was legal. But the questions about its quality, about having enough resources, about making it work effectively, well, that's a different kind of trial. And it's one that's happening right now, not in a courtroom, but in every single classroom across the country.